So this knight would really be in a weak position. So, and in fact, there's not really a whole lot I can do with the knight. I mean, I can move my bishop back to here to give it an escape square, but then I'd really be cramping in my pieces. So, because of, I saw that he was really threatening to cramp my pieces in, and I saw that in general, he was weakening his pawn structure on his king side. And so I decided to make a little bit of a sacrifice over here to blow open his, first of all, to end whatever pawn march he was going to have on the king side, and number two, to weaken his king structure a little bit. And that is knight take b4. Knight take b4 is of course a knight sacrifice, but it puts me in a really good position. And now he obviously he pretty much has to accept the sacrifice. The bishop is threatened over here. If he moves the bishop back, I would just trade it, be up a pawn. So he's pretty much got to accept my sacrifice over here. And so a takes b4. Bishop takes b4, and now I've got that pin established on his knight. I have, that knight is pinned at this point. I can always trade it off. I'm down by a pawn. I'm down, I've traded a knight for 2 pawns. I'm down by 1 point, but his king can now be a little vulnerable. Now, unfortunately, I really don't have much of a way to exploit that vulnerability at this point. My queen is pretty out of the action. This knight can't really do much. This bishop isn't really threatening his king much. Maybe the queen could eventually move to the a file if this pawn moves. At this point, it's not really much of a threat, but at least I think, first of all, I blew up whatever chance he had of launching a major kingside attack with his pawns. Now you can see, with no pawns on the h file or the g file, and me with my fiend shadow bishop over here, my king is very, very safe. Okay, so he moves his queen. He wants to get his queen over into the attack. Now, the one thing you do if you take away the pawns on a file, if you take the white pawns on the file, the one problem you're going to have is that opens up that file to his major pieces. See, as long as his pawns were in front, his rook wouldn't help that much in the attack. But now, even though he's got his king over there, he can maneuver his king out. Maybe move his rook to the a file. Maybe move to the h file. Maybe move the other rook to the g file. Maybe move the queen. And try to launch an attack down the half open files over here on the king side of the board. So he moves his queen in preparation to move it over. I move my pawn to d6, and that's to cut off this bishop. One thing that I've been concerned about for a few moves already is that this pawn was pinned, so that eventually, if this pawn were off the board, or if this pawn were moved, this pawn would be undefended because it was pinned. Also, I really don't like that bishop knifing into my king over here, so I could either move my king, or I could just move this bishop up, and this pawn up, and this serves the dual purpose of also allowing, some room for my queen, preventing queen, that prevents him from moving the queen to a4, because now it's protected by my queen on that side. Okay, so now he makes what was either a sacrifice, an unsound sacrifice, or a mistake, and that's why I really can't take too much credit for this game, because he made a pretty silly mistake unless it was a very devious sacrifice that turned out in the end not to be very sound. My feeling was that it probably was a mistake, but still, he was a highly rated player, and he still had chances to win or draw the game after that. And that is queen to g3. Now, of course, he hangs his knight over here. Which makes me think it's probably not much of a sacrifice. I guess I tried to delude myself into thinking that he was sacrificing his knight to open up these files over here to get the bishop out of the way, but probably what happened was he just forgot all about the fact the knight was hanging. He wanted to move the queen out. So I took the knight. Bishop takes e2, threatening his rook. He moves his rook up again. Now again, he's sacrificed the knight. Now he's down by 2 pawns, or he's lost the knight. Now he's down by 2 pawns. But again, he moves his knight with tempo, which means when I move my bishop back, he can swing his knight over to the a file. Again, building up a pretty substantial attack along the a file. He's got both bishops in the game still, which can both aid in the attack. He's got a knight, which can help a little bit, especially if this pawn, if the d pawn moves to d4, to d5, that knight can come in here, which could be a very good outpost for it. And I have to move my bishop over here, so I can't use that to defend. I move my bishop to f3. I'm sorry, to d3. Now my other option was to move it to h5. Now if I move it to h5, then it's not as centralized, obviously, and although at least it would be one line of defense along the a file, it would also defend this pawn. But the main reason why I did that is very simple. I still don't like the fact that this bishop is slicing in here, even though there are now 2 pawns in the way. I would really love to get this pawn over here. And getting this pawn over here, well, without the bishop there, he could just, move his b pawn to threaten it, and eventually this diagonal would reopen up. Now I figure if my pawn moves to c4, it's not that easy for him to open it, because now I've got it protected by two pieces, this bishop and this pawn, with the potential for a third piece, this knight, to move to a5 to protect it. So that goes a little bit more towards shutting his bishop out of the way. And again, I'm figuring that, I'm up by 2 pawns now. If I can hold that bishop out of the way, I'll probably be able to withstand whatever attack he throws down the king side. He swings his rook over, as he was planning to do, I'm sure, anyway. He maybe his next move is to move his king. He wants to swing the other rook over. Eventually, obviously, he wants to come down the a file and take and get this very, very vulnerable h pawn over here. Okay, so rather than taking this out right away, I move my queen out to get it a little bit more active in the defense. I want to be able to perhaps move my bishop to the h file and then move the queen here to protect this spot. Maybe, whatever it is, my queen over here is really 2 moves away from even getting involved in the action, as it is. Maybe, well, I guess I had an escape avenue. If, this way I create an escape avenue for my king. My king could always move to f8 and then to e7 and then to d8 or d7. If I felt that there was too much pressure on this file, even if I had to sacrifice this pawn, then I would get the rooks involved. So I really thought it was important to put the queen over there. So now he does what his plan a few moves ago was, to move to f2. He's planning on swinging that rook over, and he's going to have all 3 major pieces bearing down on my king, and then hopefully he's going to for him, he's going to get his knight and his bishop involved in the action as well. So my move now is, of course, what I was planning on doing last move, but I felt I had to do one in between move to get the queen out, and that is c4. See, that really shuts down his diagonal. That diagonal, which is something that I have to be very worried about for the future, for my king's safety. I really shut down that diagonal, and at this point really shut his light squared bishop out of the game. He can move it back, which is what he did, but then it certainly is something that his light squared bishop is now certainly neutralized, at least. Now he swings his rook over. Now he's got rooks doubled on the a file, and notice I now have I now have this pawn over here, this h7 pawn is hanging. He can just take it, and once he does that, it's going to be some trouble for me. He can't go right away to h8 and checkmate, because the bishop is defending that square and the queen is defending that square. But he can get his queen in. Maybe he can back up his rook. Maybe he can bring his knight over here, and then his knight to f3 and then to g5, and really cause some havoc along this file. So I realized that, and the only way to defend it for me at this point was to play h5. Now notice over here how important it was that his bishop is shut out of this diagonal. If these 2 pawns, the pawn on c4 and the pawn on d6, are not here, then this would be an extremely precarious position for me, because this pawn would only be protected by the queen, and if that queen somehow moved or whatever it is, he could simply take this pawn, because this pawn would be pinned. But earlier in the game, because I was so careful to try to shut this bishop out of the action, that's really the reason why my king is not under any more duress than it actually is. He moves his bishop back again. He realizes at this point he's not going to punch through. He's not going to punch through on this side of the board. So he decides to at least get my very well centralized bishop out of there. I thought about trading, drawing the knight to the back rank, but I really didn't. I figured, let him trade. There's really no reason why I should spend a move doing it, even though I would avoid doubling my pawns. I really didn't see any inherent reason not to. Also, I wanted to put a little bit more pressure on his attack. And so I played d5. Again, see, this pawn is pinned at this point. He can move it up, but he can't just simply take this pawn because it's pinned. So he trades off the bishop, again forcing me to double my pawns. Now it's his move, and I have a pawn over here which could be weak in the long term, but if you think about it right now, it's actually pretty strong. And I guess when the bishop moves out of the way, then the queen will have a free shot at it. But first of all, that bishop isn't moving. That bishop has nowhere to move right now. It can't move here because of the pawn. Can't move here. Can't move here. Can't move here. So for the time being, that pawn actually, is in his throat a little bit, and maybe I can protect it somehow a little bit later on. He moves his king out of the way. Again, there's no real reason for him